So it looks like you've all survived the storm, Hurricane Ian. I mean, it was a tough one, wasn't it? I mean, in some cases, luckily over here, it seems like we did better than a lot of our friends over in the Fort Myers area. Did you see the pictures? It was devastating, wasn't it? Just boats on top of houses and cars thrown streets away, and devastating. But it's a reality of Florida, isn't it? Hurricanes come. Let me ask you this. When a storm is coming, what do you need to do to prepare? Somebody just shout something out. What do you need to survive a storm? Batteries, water, what else? Food, a generator, sandbags, flashlight, snacks, radio, propane, family. It's only a matter of time. You stock up on a bunch of items because you don't know what's going to happen, how long you're going to be without power, whether you're going to need food, what you're going to need to do to survive. And so you prepare yourself for the storms that come in our world. But the question is, how do you prepare yourself for the storms of life? Storms in the real world are unpredictable. They're scary and can be very dangerous. But they're sort of rare in a way. I mean, we know when they're coming, thankfully, and we're quite a bit inland, and so that's helpful. But they're unpredictable and scary. But a storm in this life, like Hurricane Ian, doesn't really affect our eternal destination. Storms of life often do. Have you ever felt rejected? That's a storm. Have you ever suffered? Have you ever been injured? Have you ever engaged in a tragedy or fought depression? Or maybe you're struggling with a sickness. Maybe it's been abuse. Those are different kinds of storms in life. And here's the question I'm going to ask and do my best to answer this morning is, how do we prepare ourselves to survive the storms of life? In the Bible, Jesus told a story. It's a parable. You'll find it in Luke chapter 6, verses 46 through 49. Let me read it to you. You follow along in your Bible. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Now, Jesus is sharing this parable at the end of a very famous sermon. He's just given his Sermon on the Mount. Inarguably, the most famous sermon ever given. And he tells this story because he has a concern that many people, having heard this famous sermon, will not listen and do what he said. And so he uses some very vivid imagery that people in his audience would have been familiar to. In the Middle East, it's a very hot and arid and dry climate. So what happens is the ground bakes in the sun and becomes very, very hard. And water is not easily absorbed into that ground. And so if it rains hard all of a sudden and a river overflows, there's flash flooding. So everybody that's listening to what he said would have immediately associated his words. Oh yeah, I've seen that before. I've experienced that before. The water comes and it can wipe away anything in its path. Now what he says is, the wise person, the person who hears the words that he spoke and does them, is like somebody who digs below that first surface and goes all the way to the bedrock and makes a foundation for his house on the rock. It's funny to imagine that some people would listen to Jesus and not do what he says. I wonder if those people who were there at that sermon and went away and ignored Jesus' words, eventually later regretted not doing what he said to do. Maybe they didn't believe he was God. Maybe they didn't believe he was the Messiah, and later found out that he was and said, boy, I wish I would have paid attention. It's amazing to think the most gifted teacher on earth could still be ignored. But the truth is, a lot of times we do the very same thing. We have the word, and we choose at times to ignore it. Jesus is drawing a dividing line in the sand, so to speak. His audience contains two different groups of people. Metaphorically speaking, a group that recognizes storms come. And so when it's time to build, they build on a firm foundation. And another group that is not worried about storms, and they build right on the soft foundation. And of course, he's not really talking about building at all. He's not talking about structures. He's talking about the storms of life and the challenges that we have. Here's the thing you need to know. Both of these individuals experienced the same level of flooding. One was shaken but survived. The other was shaken and destroyed. For Jesus, there's no middle ground when it comes to listening and obeying him. Did you notice that? There's no middle ground. There's no middle sort of building that was sort of damaged. There's one that survived and one that was destroyed. And that's true of listening to Jesus too. If we listen to his words, we have to follow them. If we listen and only follow a little bit, it's like we're not following them at all. Let me ask you this. Which of those two houses would you rather live in? Would you rather live in the house that's stable and unshakable, or would you rather live in the house that is subject to destruction? Here's my first point. You can write this down if you're taking notes. In order to survive the storms of life, the first thing you have to do is choose a good foundation. Choose a good foundation. The houses are symbolic of our lives. Each activity, each thought, each word is a part of the building process. And you're choosing a foundation for your life even if you don't realize it. At the core of this foundation essentially is what we believe, who we believe. This is called a worldview. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. What's your worldview? Everyone has a worldview. It's a combination of your beliefs. It's a combination of the things you do, the things you say, where you invest your time, where you invest your money. That's your worldview. And it doesn't matter if those beliefs are based on something true or based on something false. They make up your foundation. Now, some people decide to create a foundation on things like success. I'm going to build my life on success. Or maybe I want to build my life on reputation. I want to be famous. I want to be somebody significant. I want to be an influencer. Some of those things kind of add up to money. Some people say, well, I want to build my foundation on finances. I want to make sure we're covered for the future. Or some people build on a foundation of pleasure. I just want to do what makes me happy right now. I'll worry about one day at a time. And if it serves my interests, then that's my foundation. And those are not good things to build the foundation of your life on. But some people make this mistake. They pick something good and they build their foundation on that. Yeah. For example, some people build their life on the foundation of family. We say, no, family is good. We talk about family all the time. Family is important. It is, but should family be the foundation? Some people build on the foundation of education. I want to be smarter. I want to make a future for my kids. I want to make sure we're educated. And they build on that foundation. There's nothing wrong with education. It's a good thing. But should it be the foundation of your life? Some people, are you ready for this? Build on the foundation of religion. That seems like a really good thing. But trust me, there's a difference between religion and Christ. And some people say, I'll build my foundation on going to church, being a good person, singing the right songs, putting money in the plate. Some people in our culture today build on the foundation of science. This is what I'm going to believe in. This is the foundation that I will choose. Even though science tends to change as we learn more about our environment. Here's the thing. When those things become the thing that we build our lives on, we're risking laying a faulty foundation that simply won't withstand the storms of life. And you put all that stuff together and it's very wobbly and it's very topsy-turvy. It might fall over. Let me ask you this question. Today, what are you building the foundation of your life on? This is a question that you should be thinking about. What is truly the foundation of my life? Is it success, reputation, money, fame, pleasure? Is it something good like family, education, religion, or science? Here's my second point. Surviving the storms of life means choosing Jesus. Choosing Jesus. Let's turn in our Bibles quickly. Don't lose your place in Luke 6 because we're going to come back. But let's go to 1 Corinthians. Should be a very familiar passage for us since we're studying the book of 1 Corinthians. It's over to the right. As soon as you cross over the book of Romans, you'll find 1 Corinthians. For those of you that haven't been here with us over the last couple of weeks, 1 Corinthians is the first letter. Well, technically it's the second letter, but the first letter that we have a copy of that the Apostle Paul wrote to a group of Christians in a place called Corinth. As a church, they were kind of a big, blessed mess. They had a bunch of questions and things that they were struggling with to figure out. And one of those things is the foundation of their life. And so Paul talks about this in the 3rd chapter. Look at verse 10. He says, according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a what? Foundation. And someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it. Verse 11, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. That's the foundation for your life. See, the problem in Corinth is they had chosen to build their foundation on things that were good, but they just weren't Jesus. Some of them were saying, well, I like the teaching of Paul. Well, Paul's teaching is great. It's just not the foundation. Some people were saying, I like the teaching of Apollos. Some people were saying, I like the teaching of Peter. Paul brings them back and says, if you want a true foundation, it has to be and can only be Jesus Christ. In the parable, Jesus is drawing a line for us too. He says, which side do you want to be on? Do you want to build your life on my teaching and my word, or do you want to build it on something else? Remember, you have a choice. It's your worldview. It's what you believe. It's what you say. It's what you do. And you can choose things like success and reputation, or you can choose things like family and church and religion, or you can choose Jesus Christ. Now, here's the important thing to remember. For Paul, it's okay to build onto the foundation of Jesus because Jesus makes everything else stable. So is family important to you? I hope it is. Family built on top of the foundation of Jesus is more stable. Yes. Yes. Education built on the foundation of Jesus is more reliable. Religion built on the foundation of Jesus is not legalistic, it's grace-oriented. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Science built on the foundation of Jesus is reality and truth. Don't forget, God created science. He's in charge of all of that. Yeah. So as long as your foundation is in the right place, the rest of your life will be more stable. Now, let me just say this. It doesn't mean that your life will be perfect. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that nothing bad will happen. Remember this, in the parable, both houses have to go through the storm. It's just that one stayed standing and one fell down. You will go through the storm. There's another storm coming in Florida. It might be next week or 2 weeks from now, or it might be a year from now, but it's coming. And you might be making preparations after this storm for the next storm. You might say, okay, next time I'm going to get a generator. Right? You might say, next time I'm going to have more water. Next time I'm going to have more batteries. Well, the question is, how are you preparing for the next storm of your life? Whether it's rejection, tragedy, suffering, sickness, depression, abuse, financial challenges. Let me just say this. Even the most broken life built on Jesus is stronger than the most together life built on anything else. Even the most broken life is stronger than the most put together life that's built on something else. Here's my third and last point for today. Surviving the storm means allowing your foundation to be tested. Maybe we could say expecting your foundation to be tested. When I first got to Florida back about 20 years ago, I remember one year there were 3 hurricanes in the span of like a month. Do you guys remember that? Charlie, Francis, and Jean. And that wore me out. I remember thinking, I don't know that I want to live here anymore. Maybe we should get out of here. There was one hurricane that I put the boards up on the windows. I didn't even take them down. The next one showed up so quickly. But you think, okay, well, I'll move out of Florida. I'll go to Kansas. Well, they have tornadoes there. I'll move out of Florida. I'll go to California. Well, they have landslides and high gas prices there. I'll go to Michigan. It's just cold there. You don't want to be there. I've spent a lot of time there. You can't escape challenges in this life by any stretch. It's interesting because in the parable, both of the men that Jesus was telling the story about, the intensity of the storm was the same. But that's not always the way it is in our lives, is it? Think about this. Here in Central Florida, I think by the time Hurricane Ian got here, it was a Category 1, maybe a little bit of a 2 as it approached. It was a lot of winds for sure, a lot of rain for sure, but for the most part, the biggest damage was trees falling on power lines. You know, a big mess at your house. Maybe some trees fell onto a house or onto a car, but there wasn't really any loss of life. Some flooding for sure down in Sanford in some low-lying areas. But the storm was powerful on the coast, wasn't it? Shocking. Well, that's true in our lives as well. You know, not everybody faces the same amount of challenges. That's just the way it is. Maybe some of you have dealt with a lifelong debilitating illness, and it doesn't seem fair that you have to go through that at that level when not everybody does. Maybe you've dealt with abuse or rejection at a level that nobody else has dealt with it. The most important thing to remember about the challenges that come in our life is not the strength of the storm that comes your way. It's what the storm reveals about your foundation. Because the truth is, the storm illustrates who you are as a person. It illustrates the stability of the building that you're living in.
Yes, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
For me, I'm embarrassed to say this, but as soon as we lose power, I get cranky. How many of you can relate to that? I mean, no damage to my house, thankfully. You know, no loss of life. Nobody got hurt. I didn't lose a car or anything like that. It's just hot. And I can't turn on the lights. And I don't know how to cook. And I can't watch TV. And it just makes me cranky. When the storms of life come your way, how do you react? The tragedy for so many people in our world is that it's only when they realize that life is difficult that they know that their foundation is inadequate. And sometimes God uses that in our lives. So, here's the last question I have. How do you build your life on Jesus? How do you live a life that's guaranteed to survive every storm? Well, let's go back to Luke chapter 6. Because he says it right there in verse 47. Everyone who comes to me and hears my word and does them, I will show you what he's like. Number one, you have to come to Jesus. Everyone who comes to me, he says. Now maybe you've been walking with Jesus for your whole life, but maybe you are not following him. Maybe you're here at church or you're watching online because you're just curious, you're interested. Well, the first step in surviving a storm, the first step in choosing a good foundation is coming to Jesus. I want to challenge you. Maybe you've been sitting in church for years, but you've never said, okay, well, I'm going to give my life over to Jesus. What's stopping you? You know there is a storm coming. You know there are challenges coming your way. Jesus shows you that if you put your faith in him, you'll be able to survive the storms. Step one, come to Jesus. Number two, you got to hear his words. Hearing is different than listening, isn't it? A lot of times people can hear, but they don't listen. To hear Jesus, you have to listen. You have to seek to understand. You have to comprehend them. And then most importantly, the third thing, you've got to do them. You got to live them out. Now, of course, this is the harder part, isn't it? If you look back to the teaching of Jesus, if you just look back into the 6th chapter, remember, he was referring to things that he just said. What does he say? Verse 27, chapter 6, love your enemies. You want a strong foundation for your life? Come to Jesus, hear his words, do them. Love your enemies. Verse 37, he's talking about judging others. He says, judge not and you will not be judged. Condemn not and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. You want to have a firm foundation for your life? Well, come to Jesus. Hear his words. Do them. That means forgiving others and not judging. One thing I want you to notice is the order of these things. This is important. Because some people want to reverse these things. So they think, okay, first I'm going to follow all the rules. I'm going to follow all the rules. I'm going to do everything the Bible says, which will then allow me to come to Jesus. But it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is because you can't do those things without Jesus. He's the one that gives you the strength and the power to do those things. So let me just ask you, where's your foundation? What are you building on? Is it something other than Jesus? If it is, I want to encourage you today to make a change. Get a new building plan. Get some new diagrams. Figure out what it means to dig deep down to the rock, which is Jesus Christ. I wonder, Jerry, if you could just put the bridge for the song, I Will Build My Life, that we sang earlier. It says, I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Is that your prayer today? Is that your goal today? Jesus used a simple parable to explain how we're all building our life on something. But Jesus makes it clear there's only one foundation that will withstand the storms of life. The foundation is Jesus himself and his word. We need to come to him. We need to hear his words and put them into action to build a storm-proof life. A life that won't be free of problems, but a life that's built on the unshakable rock of Jesus Christ and his word. Let's close in prayer.